Hello, everyone. This is Shannon Torrance, and you're listening to or watching Magic is Real. This week, I had the absolute pleasure of connecting with Renu Arora. Renu is an actor, a writer, a storyteller, a singer, and she is also a near-death experiencer. Renu tells stories so beautifully, and so I'm extra excited to bring to you her story about her near-death experience and how it changed her life. I hope that even if it's just in one small way, it will change your life too. Thank you so much for being here, and here is my interview with Renu Arora. Hello, Magic is Real listeners and watchers. I'm Shannon Torrance, and back with you after a 2-month hiatus. I moved across the country from Los Angeles to Virginia. And it's been an incredible adventure and journey, but haven't really had the bandwidth to sit and do this thing that I love so much. So thank you for those of you who have already subscribed and are watching on a regular basis, and for your patience while things get back on track. But enough about me. So today I have with me the lovely Renu Arora. And instead of telling you who Renu is, I want to have her introduce herself. She's a near-death experiencer. I will say that. She has a beautiful story to share. But first, I just want to get to know her. So welcome to the show, and thank you so much for your time and energy today.
Oh, Shannon, thank you for having me on and for that lovely introduction as well. I've also had a 2-month hiatus after also moving from London to London, but it's still a move and it's still stressful, isn't it? As
It
we've talked
is.
about.
It is one, they say that moving is one of the most stressful life experiences that there is. And, and divorce. And I went through not a divorce, but a breakup of an 8-year relationship and a move across the country. So it's
Ooh,
all good, but it was a long, stressful period. And I know you've just gone through the move part too. So I'm so
yeah.
happy that you're sharing, that you're settled and you're sharing your time.
It's a joy to be on. Thank you.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you, because not only are you a near-death experiencer, you are also, I know, an actor, a musician, an artist. And first, I want to start by hearing all about that. Tell me what it is that you, I would say, do professionally.
Sure. So, yeah, thank you. I work as an actor, singer, storyteller, director, and I've been working in the arts for my whole life, really, the best part of 20 years now. And it's interesting because I've always been drawn to the human story. So I've told stories my whole life, within shows and radio shows and all sorts of things. I've told my grandmother's story of partition on the stage, told stories of domestic violence, and always been drawn to that very human story. And it's interesting because I say now publicly that 4.5 years ago, I became the story.
Right.
So yeah, so now I make work around my own experience with the skill set that, of course, I've spent a long time already sort of honing and accumulating. So I feel very privileged to have the skill set that I have, that I can now use it to tell my own story.
Right. And
But
that's one of the
professionally, this is what
reasons.
I do now. So
Yeah, I love that. And that's what we would just been talking about, that I don't just want to talk about near death experiences, but who people are, where they come from, because I personally am very interested in people's stories and
yes.
storytelling. I actually go to storytelling events and love that medium.
Mm.
So, pardon the pun, because I am a medium as well. So now I would love to start with you telling us about your life. Where did you, grow up? What was your childhood like? Maybe what your spiritual uh, perspectives or attitudes were prior to having had a near-death experience.
Sure, lovely question. I grew up in a small town in South Wales, and it was very different to London. It wasn't busy, it was very sort of calm, quiet, static, rural in that sense, peaceful, green. Um, yeah, and I went to a small school again in South Wales, and they were sort of so small, there were 30 kids per year maximum. So it was a tiny little school. So I lived a relatively sheltered life as a child, but I always had a sense that there was something else. And I should also mention that I'm a twin, and my twin sadly passed away sort of relatively soon after birth. And I'd always felt that connection to him, even though of course he's not with us incarnate. So I always felt that I was sort of half of a whole, and I always felt that he was here with me in every aspect of my life. And so I had this sense that there was just something there. And I believed in magic like all kids do, but I really believed in magic. I was like, this is really real. It's not like something that I'll grow out of, it's like really real. And that stayed with me through sort of my early teens and things. And I did have various, what I would class as sort of spiritual or even sort of out of body experiences, but I didn't put it down to anything more than just sort of one of those things. So, for example, when I was 8 years old, the school was auditioning for the school Christmas show, and I knew I'd wanted to sing, but I'd never sung before that point in my sort of early years. But I knew I had this urge to sing, and I knew it was where I was meant to be, but I didn't have an experience of it. And so auditions were coming up, and I was thinking sort of, what to sing, what to sing. And audition day came, and I was so happy. I was like, yeah, I get to sing. And audition day came, and the teacher was sort of asking the kids to put their hand if they wanted to audition. And my hand shot up. But because I was quite a sort of quiet kid, at that point, I didn't get picked to audition. And I was absolutely gutted beyond gutted. And my hand shot up again, and I was like, what about me? I've got to audition. What about me? And I remember thinking, who's this person that's kind of asserting themselves? It's just not me. And they went, okay. The teacher was like, okay. Probably, maybe thinking, well, I've got who I want now, but just because you asked me to, I'll let you audition. And I did, and I sort of ran up to the sort of the front of the class, and I sang This Little Light of Mine, the folk song. And I remember, I didn't even know I was going to sing that song. And I remember sort of kind of floating up, exiting my body, watching myself sing and thinking, where's this voice coming from? It's huge, and it's pounding, and it's resonant, and it's there. And I remember just kind of feeling, it wasn't me. I'd absolutely floated up, and I ejected my body. And I remember thinking, this is amazing. This is what I want to do. I've come home. And then I got the main part. And it was just such a phenomenal experience. I'll never forget it, because to me it felt so, almost in some ways, it felt like it was connected to the NDE, because that was the first time I felt like I'd touched God. And the NDE was, of course, touching God in a bigger way.
Yep, that makes so much sense. And this is why I like to go back in time.
Yeah.
To really know who you are and get a sense of your personality and what you're interested in, and who you are, but also that so many near-death experiencers that I have spoken with did have prior spiritual experiences, which leads me to believe, I don't want to say everyone, but which leads to me to believe that this was part of your life path, to have a near-death experience, to do the work that you do now and incorporate it into your creative life as well. And I hear this from so many near-death experiencers that was not the first time that they popped out of their body and had a greater awareness. And it feels to me almost like God, source, whatever you choose to call the energy we all come from, sort of chose you to give you a glimpse into the other side, to let you know, because there was something that you needed to do along those lines. Would you agree? And what do you have to say about that?
I would wholeheartedly agree with you. I feel like my childhood was very spiritual in that sense. I always had this sort of internal connection to God, to the greater, to source, really. And then, even though I chose a career which is sort of inspiration and opening up to that space, I wasn't in that space. And I, sort of career and everything else just took over through my sort of, early 20s and 20s, that I knew that I was disconnected. And I knew that even though I was in a career that brought me joy and that I loved, I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do. I knew that it was connected, like of course it is now, but I knew then, but I also felt like it wasn't completely there. So I'd put up all these sort of barriers and, I suppose just barriers that disconnected me from who I was. And I'd had all sorts of bouts of ill health sort of through my life. And actually a year before the accident, I'd had glandular fever, which, you may know is horrible. And I'd had 4 bouts of that through my 20s and 30s, and it lasted about a year each time, well, between 6 months and a year each time. And so about a year before the accident, I had another bout of glandular fever. And I was so ill, but I just thought, I've got to work, I've got to work, I've got to work. So I pushed and pushed and pushed through all the jobs that I had, just thinking, oh, it's really important. I've got to do this, And I knew that I was massively disconnecting, and I just wasn't living my purpose, and I wasn't prioritizing myself. I was hurting myself. I just knew it. I'd felt like my heart was wood or iron, I just couldn't get to it, because I knew that I put up all these layers, and I just couldn't get back into that beautiful space that I wanted to, that was me, that expanse. And so I'd spent night after night, sort of months before the accident, sort of in my bed, just kind of wishing, I need to break, I need to break, I need to break, I need something to break me, And on the 28th of March, 2017, I was sitting with my friend in a restaurant, and I was just crying with exhaustion. And I was just saying, I'm so tired. And he said, I know, you've worked and worked and worked through being so unwell. Because I would text him in the middle of jobs, and I would say, I've gone green, I'm that sick. He said, you need a break, you just need a break. Can you go into work tomorrow and just tell the team that you need a bit of time out? And, through my tears, I was just like, yeah, I think I need to do that. So the following day then, I went to work, and I said to my team, I've broken physically, emotionally, I just need a bit of time out. And they went, of course, take as much time as you need. And then that day, the accident happened.
Wow. I always,
So
I,
yes, I agree
yeah,
with you.
thank you for sharing that. I have been saying a lot that as things happen in my life, I say, I know what this is, because I'm starting to notice that God is writing my screenplay, because I
I
start
love
to
that.
see as I get older, like, oh, I see what you did there. I know why that happened. And it makes it,
Yeah.
now I find it so interesting when things happen that maybe aren't to my liking or a little disappointing, or why is this not happening fast enough? I go, well, I know why. And it's because it's setting me up for something better
Yeah.
to get me back on the path. So I love these stories so much. So
Oh,
let's jump to the day that your soul crossed over.
oh, sure. So yeah, so I'd come home from work, and as I said, I was exhausted, but I planned to make a curry with a friend of mine that evening, who used to be an old housemate of mine, and she moved out to get married, so she was living just across the road from me still, because she worked nearby. And so she knew that I'd been ill, and I said, I'm not well, but I still want to see you. And she was like, well, don't worry, I'll come over and we can, chop and prepare together. So you don't have to do all that much, but we can still have our evening. And I said, okay. So I got home, and my phone had lost its battery. And I texted her and I said, well, I'll go and buy the ingredients, which was sort of 5 minutes down the road, the local shop. And I'll sort of meet you back at the flat in sort of, 20 minutes, but I'll leave my phone here because there's no battery left. And she went, totally fine. So I walked out, went to the shop, and it's a shop that I've lived on that street for sort of, prior to moving here, sort of 10 years. So I knew the area really, really well. And it's, a small shop in a small suburb in London. And I kind of thought, well, it's one of those, it's not a problem. I went to the shop, and and in the shop, the queue was extending outside on this day. And I just thought, it's not Christmas, it's not New Year, there's no Jewish festival. I lived in a Jewish area. So I was like, why is there a queue coming out of the shop on this day? And I had my basket of ingredients in my hand, and I just thought, well, my friend's going to be at my door buzzing by the time, before I've paid, and she's going to be worried about me because she knows I've not been well. So I just said to the cashiers, can I just leave my basket on the counter and just go and tell my friend, who they knew well, that I'm just going to, wave at her, tell her I'm okay, and then come back in the shop, pay, and that'll be that. And they agreed. And I just walked out, looked up the road in the direction in which she'd be coming, and I couldn't see her. And I thought, that's odd. I was wearing a purple jumper, and I thought, well, she won't miss me, but I can't see her. So I walked towards the edge of the pavement a bit more, still couldn't see her. And there was a bus stop obscuring my vision up the pavement. But I thought, well, it's 6 o'clock in the evening. It's sort of relatively light. I'm sure I'll see her if she comes. I still couldn't see her, and I walked towards the edge a bit more. Now we used to live on a busy road, that even though the suburb was a busy road there, and there was a bus lane parallel to the shops in the house, and I didn't hear a bus coming in, and I still thought there was no bus coming in. So I walked towards the edge of the pavement, kept looking up the road, put my arm up in the air so she'd see that I was safe, and I just signaled that, that if she saw me, that I was in the shop. And I put my toes over the edge to get a better view so I could see her. And as I did, a bus was clearly coming in, which I hadn't heard. And as it came in, it caught the edge of my boot and started to drag my lower leg and foot underneath the wheel of the bus. And I could see my foot and my leg being dragged in slow motion underneath the wheel of the bus. And I remember thinking, how much of my leg and how much of me is this bus going to take? I think I'm a goner. I think I'm finished.
Wow. And to hear that, especially as an empath, I actually have tingles down my leg feeling that feeling. I don't know what they call, there's a name for that, where you feel someone else's pain physically.
Oh, yeah, there is.
I forget, it's something, and I think it might, I don't know if it's just women, but we feel it because we're meant to protect our young. Like my my nephew the other day, my nephew the other day jumped off of something and landed on his feet, and I literally got like shooting, not pain, but a sensation up my legs. And I said to him, I feel that in my own body, and I think it's a protective mechanism. But
oh, that's amazing. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's just women, but it's something that I know someone falls and you feel it in your body. But and so that's what I feel. And yet I know that I've heard your story, and you said that you didn't feel anything. Well, you felt something, but tell us what it is that you did feel.
You're right. I didn't feel pain at the time, and that's for a number of reasons. And the first reason, of course, is the adrenaline.
Shock, yeah.
Absolute shock. I actually felt the cortisol, the shock chemicals, literally flooding my brain. It was like my brain was drowning in shock, and I could feel the chemicals sort of rising. And when you're drowning and you could feel the water rising, I literally thought, I'm going to drown soon in shock chemicals. It was just such a strange feeling. But of course, as you know, at that time I also disconnected and ejected my body. But there were a few realities that were starting to take place. So the first one was, of course, I was trapped underneath the wheel of the bus. The second reality was that I literally felt like I was still standing up. I literally felt like I had my wallet and my keys in my right hand, and my left arm was in the air waving to my friend. And I could feel my 2 feet firmly on the ground, standing up. It was such a strange feeling. And of course, the third one was that I'd started to eject at that point. And I was floating up, floating up, floating up. And eventually I could see the top of the red bus. And I just remember going, oh, wow, wow, wow. And I could see my body underneath the wheel of the bus. And that's where this sort of connection in NDE started to happen. And the higher that I floated, the more the physical world started to fall away. And I remember I felt like my wingspan was the whole of my burrow and back. It was just so wide. I felt like I was expanding, 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 and just becoming so wide and full of love. And I felt a connection to everyone and everything. And I could almost feel people's thoughts and people's feelings. And I could feel their love and mine and everybody's divinity and my own. And it was just this beautiful connection and expanse. And at that point, I saw and felt these beautiful shards of light. When you look through a window in the morning and you see shards of light reflecting off and coming into the room, it looked like that. There were beautiful shards of light that were beaming into my heart from every single direction like a star. It was just phenomenal. And the light was love. It was just pure love. And I felt warm and present and joyful. It was just pure joy.
I love that hearing this, it brings so much warmth and joy to my heart. And I just want to say, this is why I do what I'm doing by sharing these, helping to get the word out just a little bit more, because for so many reasons. But one of the things that has been striking me is that I know I always have had a fear, even though I love to travel and fly, I've always been so afraid of dying in a plane crash, or for some reason, that's my fear. And and just of not so much dying, but of the pain involved. And what I keep hearing over and over, and I've been telling other people this, is we fear so much that pain. And I'm not going to say that nobody feels pain, because there's so many ways you can die or be hurt that are excruciatingly painful. But what I keep hearing from people like you is that you don't feel the pain when it's happening, because your soul is out before. It's partly a protective mechanism that your body puts yourself into with the adrenaline and the shock. But then also your soul checks out so that you don't have to feel that pain. And that is so comforting.
Yeah.
That is so incredibly comforting, because there is such a fear of, my mom always said, well, if you die in a plane crash, you're not going to know. It's going to happen so fast. I'm like, I'm going to know. I'm going to know when I'm going
Yeah.
down. Yes, the fear may be real, but I love to hear that your soul does you the favor of leaving and being able to look down on
Yes.
it objectively and not feel pain or fear about it. And I want to ask you if that's kind of what it felt like. Obviously, you were in a blissful state, but when you look down at that body, that you're able to be removed from it and say, oh, and I've heard people say the body. They don't even say that's
Um,
me, that's my body. A lot of times they'll just say, oh, there's a body. I know somehow I'm connected to that body, but it doesn't feel like me. Can you elaborate on that?
yeah, I felt that too. I mean, I did feel, I could obviously tell that it was me, but it didn't feel, I had no connection to it. I had
Yeah.
no emotional investment or connection to it. It was just simply an observation without any sense of connection or judgment, And it's interesting you say that, because later on, after the NDE had finished, uh, I screamed, and that's what brought me back into my body. Was the scream hoovered me back into my body, and the scream felt like it lasted a lifetime, literally a lifetime, and I felt like I only screamed the tail. Remember screaming the tail end of that scream, because I remember actually I was still up when the scream started. It was such a strange thing. I was still up watching this and hearing the scream, and I remember thinking, "Where's the scream? Where's this animalistic,
Yeah.
guttural sound coming from?" And then, of course, I was hoovered back in, and I remember then screaming the last fraction of that scream.
Right, which is so fascinating, because you think, if I'm up here, who's operating the body?
Yeah,
Who's and it's that
yeah,
whole thing of timelessness, and that two things can
yes,
happen simultaneously, but your
yes,
awareness and your consciousness is elsewhere, and yet your
yes,
body's still able to react and respond, which is and
yes,
still beat. So
yes.
you're in two places at once.
100%. I mean, I felt like I was, in many ways in three places at once, because I was still standing up. I
Yeah,
really felt like there was an imprint of me still standing up too, and I felt it. I really
right.
felt it. So yeah, it's amazing how this timelessness can create multiple realities. And some NDEs have so many realities, don't they?
Yeah,
And for me, there were other things that happened in the NDE that also felt like they were all happening at the same time.
which is a common theme.
Yes,
And is it
yes.
I often hear from people who cross over that they experience entities or loved ones. And I think I've sort of come to the conclusion that it kind of depends on how deep you go, how
Mm,
far over you go. And none of
mm,
us will really ever know what happens once it's done and it's final and you're
yeah.
really over there. But for you, was there a sensation of other beings, or was it just a sense of being one with everything?
I didn't sense other beings, loved ones that crossed over in that sense, but I did sense God, what
Yeah.
I would feel and deem as God, very much so, because just thought, well, it felt like after, but who knows in terms of actual time. I felt like my heart was taken out of my chest
Hmm.
whilst I was in that space, and given a really beautiful polish, like a car wash almost, to the point where it was squeaky clean, filled up to the brim with love and purified, and then put back in. And then I also heard a voice that felt like a male voice in its resonance. It was very deep, and it literally reverberated through the entirety of my essence. It was like it
Hmm.
sort of echoed through the whole of my essence. And the voice said, "Love is all there is."
That's beautiful. And again, I got chills, because that seems to be the resounding message,
Yeah.
that love is, it's, we think of it as like, oh, it's so hippie and it's so Beatles, and but there's a reason for it, and it's because it's just true. That's really honestly what matters. And
It
so,
is. Oh,
yeah.
sorry, go
Oh
on,
no, no,
please.
I was going to say you go on.
Oh, bless you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It is. I was just going to add to that and agree with you. It is. And actually, after that message, I also received another message that was give love, give love, give love, because love is all there is. And it's such an, it's really transformed how I live my life and how I mean, obviously, but it's transformed how I perceive love, because it's so different to the kind of the human love that I craved, before the accident. It's a much more sort of existential. It's not a human type of love, and therefore that's given me a real sense of self love I didn't have also before the accident. And it's a different kind of love. It's a different kind of self love. It's a being, like I say, existential. It's so real, that love, and I know that love will never go and be depleted. But that said, that doesn't mean I don't have to look after myself in this life, so that
Oh,
I can then
yeah.
give that love.
So well said. It's that whole put your own oxygen mask on first.
Yeah,
You can't love others until you love yourself. And to me, that
yeah,
I share this not to go on about me, but I think it means something to me personally that I think resonates with a lot of us, which is why I
yeah.
share this. But as a recovering sex and love addict myself, that message resonates so much, and honestly is why I feel so healed in that area, because I was someone that needed validation and craved that connection, but couldn't get enough, because
Yeah.
human beings can't give you that. I mean, no one can give you that but your soul, yourself, God, as you perceive God, and connection with others. And even having moved across the country where I have my family, and I do have some friends, suddenly I'm like, I love this state. I love the beauty of Virginia. It's so green and there's nature and streams and frogs and fireflies. And I'm suddenly going, oh, but my people, I miss my people. Now I do
Mm.
miss my people, but every night I meditate and do yoga if I'm home. And I keep centering back to sitting in the power, which is connecting with source and spirit, and remembering that I'm not alone. In fact, my people is, the energy. And yes, connection with other humans is vital, but I don't need it in the same way. I don't
Yeah.
need it to validate me. I don't need it to make me feel like a whole person. And I was suicidal many times in my life because I couldn't get, I couldn't get that enough love from other people to make me feel like I was okay. So that message is so
Mm.
important. And I hope resonates with a lot of people, even if they're not addicts per se. I think it's so, as a human being, that's our go to. We look for it in drugs, alcohol, people, shopping, gambling, gaming, phones, to be distracted.
Overachieving, all sorts of things.
Overachieving
Yeah,
is my thing
yeah,
too. I'm a
yeah,
workaholic overachiever. Still, that's my addiction that kind of remains, but I'm
yeah.
getting better. And I think that's the thing that we do, is it's so easy to grasp onto the physical, the material, the tangible, and we forget that we aren't actually alone at all. And we're very supported and held. And also it's amazing to connect like you and I are. And
Exactly.
because our souls are connecting, and that's why it feels good, but it's a healthy love. Like, I don't know you and I love you because I know we're both part of the same energy. So
Yeah,
that
exactly.
I keep getting like the biggest chills. So it's like,
Oh,
I just
I
had to.
felt it too in that moment.
Did you? Yeah. So I just had to
Yeah.
share that, not to go on and on. But
Oh,
then, so you come back into your body, which I hear is the most painful part of it. But what do you
yeah.
experience from that point on?
Well, just before I answer that question, I just want to, if it's okay
Yeah.
with you, just
Oh,
sort of honor
please.
what you've said as well about, feeling like it was never enough. Because, I mean, obviously, I'd love to ask you sort of what turned it around for you, as
Yeah.
well as also share that I had a light bulb moment relatively soon after the accident, where I was saying a prayer and a meditation, and I realized, I mean, this was such a big deal for me. I realized that the only judgment that had come before the accident was from me. God was never judging me. And I had lived my life fearing that I was being judged and punished all the time.
Yeah.
So I was living in the state of,
Yeah.
oh, I'm not doing enough, I'm not being good enough, and that wasn't good enough, and I said that wrong, and I hurt that person. And it was just this constant beating myself up, feeling like that was all coming from God. And I had this light bulb moment, and I remember thinking, "Yeah, God isn't judging me, I am."
Yep.
And that then led to me feeling, tapping into that NDE space and just kind of feeling like I'm perfect as I am.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's so beautiful. And to elaborate a little bit, just because I think it does lend itself to the discussion,
Yeah.
I do want to talk about what turned it around for me, because it is what you're saying.
Mm.
I mean, I found it because someone said you might want to go try out this 12-step program
Ah.
for sex and love addicts that I've been through, and it's really helped me. And I went in, I guess, agnostic. I don't want to say
Uh-huh.
atheist, but definitely not spiritual, um, although very open-minded.
Yeah.
And I think I was always someone, I'm such a lone wolf. I'm very social, and I'm also a lone wolf, and I don't like group activities and holding. I love to hug people, but I don't like the whole chanting of the mantras and
Mm.
whatever. But the reason that the 12-step program worked for me and works for so many is because it it um it has you look at it has you look at your past and where you're coming from, but then
Mm.
you're turning it over to God. And that scares a lot of people because they're like, this is not, this sounds like a cult. It sounds like a church. I don't like this. Someone said to me, it doesn't have to be God. It could be a doorknob. All you have to
Mm.
understand is that you are not in control. You are trying to steer
Yeah.
the ship. You are trying to manipulate and control. And I can manage this and I can work through it. And you're fighting against the current. You're fighting against the flow. When you give it up to God, and even though I always hated mantras, I always say, let go and let God whenever things aren't going my way.
Ah.
Just trust, let go. And the learning to let go, and a lot of other things, being of service, self-care, the main thing, self-care, really taking time to be by myself, but and really just like focus on loving myself and caring for myself first. Um, that's what it is, though. It was that acceptance of there's a power greater than I am, that I am part of. This isn't my ship to steer. Yes, I have free will, but my free will is not getting me into healthy places. My self-will is taking me
Yes.
down a hole where I want to end my life. Every single
Mm.
time I go through withdrawal from my drug, I I feel like I can't survive because it hurts so badly. So let's maybe give it up to God. And when I did that, obviously it was like a 10-year process, but
Of course.
once I learned to just trust God, the universe, and say, what do you have in store for me? And trust
Mm.
that whatever that is in my highest and best good. And then I just pray, please let me be of service. Let me love myself. It works. And it's, it just works. And so it's about going with
Yeah.
the current and the flow. So tell me your thoughts too, because I'd love to
And
hear that.
that's really, that's such a, I mean, I'd heard, like you, I'd done all those I had done all those affirmations before
Yeah.
the accident myself about going with the flow, and people had told me that I wasn't able to sort of let go and just couldn't go with the flow, and I
Mhm.
really, really couldn't. I got it up here, but I didn't get it here,
Yeah.
and it's so interesting that I kind of feel like for me, I was given all these sort of little signs, including glandular fever, and which I'd had for years, many times, and all sorts of other things and illnesses, and I didn't learn. And it
Yep.
seemed like I felt like the universe kind of all whacked me over the head with a hammer and kind of gone, now will you listen?
And it always does that. It
And
always,
yes,
that's how it works. It will always set you straight. So
yes.
I love to hear that. And so I'd love to hear how, when you return to the body,
Mm.
you could, anything you want to share about the moments after, or even just after it, after you were treated and in recovery and healing, how your
So
perspective
much to
changed.
say.
I know. Take it from anywhere, just free flow.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
Um, it was a very, very difficult, traumatic, bumpy process
Yeah.
in the initial aftermath, as of course it would be after a huge trauma. So I mean, obviously there was the physical, the emotional, the trauma, the spiritual, the psychological. There were so many different facets to my recovery, of course, which there is within any after any sort of physical trauma like that. So there were so many things to integrate, and I just didn't know where to start. I mean, I had a very crushed, lower leg and foot that actually wasn't treated for 5 weeks because it wasn't fat. I was sent home from the hospital with no injuries, but it transpired that I had 8 bones that were in several pieces each. So I had about, sort of 20 to 30 pieces of bone floating around in my foot. It was crushed to pieces. And yet, it wasn't found for 5 weeks. So I was sent home and I sort of had 5 weeks of absolute hell on my sofa without painkillers because the doctor didn't diagnose it because he didn't sort of do the correct tests because he didn't realize what had happened because the handover between the ambulance and there'd been miscommunication there. So that had just become a massive crosswire. So that was obviously huge, sitting in my flat with, no treatment and no help. And I was literally crying every day in extremes of pain. I mean, one broken bone requires morphine. I had 8 in several pieces, plus a broken ligament, plus a collapsed arch, plus dislocations, plus nerve damage. It was just a disaster. And I was in so much pain that I couldn't get myself back to the hospital because I lived on the first floor with several flights of stairs. So it was absolutely awful. And in that time, I really felt like a part of my brain died off because it moved into my foot. And my days were broken down into literally moments. And all I could do was breathe just every day. I mean, it was like being in a 5-week Vipassana, silent meditation retreat, because all I could do was just breathe and try and get out of my head and just find a way to get through these extremes of pain without the sort of the painkillers that I knew I needed.
Yeah.
So once that had been done and I had been treated sort of, a month later, then I could start the process of beginning to assimilate everything that had happened, and try to integrate everything. And it was a while before I was able to integrate any of the spiritual changes because the horror and the trauma of everything and the shock, of course, and, I had PTSD and all of that was just overpowering my system for a while before I could get clear enough to go, I had an NDE. This is going to transform my life.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful and so real. And I have 2 thoughts. One is that so many people who've had NDEs do talk about this, and I think it's sort of under talked about when you refer to NDEs, that it's this magical experience, and everyone says, "Oh, I wish I had one of those."
Yeah.
And the thing is that
Yeah.
it isn't easy. Whether it's because of the pain and recovery, whether it's because of the PTSD, which is serious, which is because, or if it's because acclimating to the world again after having been in this ethereal plane is extremely jarring and
Oh my God.
changes your whole perspective and how do I fit into this world again.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that. And I also have
Mm.
a question about, interestingly, so you were hit by a bus and your leg was what was really caught. So
Mm.
technically, I want to know, did the doctors say, oh, there was something that would have actually killed you? Or was it the NDE? Not all NDEs happen because you actually die. Or
Mm.
I think sometimes, as we said, your soul may leave your body. Like my mother had was sick as a kid. She was throwing up and her soul left her body
Wow.
and looked down on itself and came back. She wasn't going to die. It was just
Right.
her soul's way of relieving her from the pain she was in.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, was there an actual physical reason that you died? Or was it that your soul was leaving to spare you the pain of what was happening to your actual leg? If that
I
makes sense.
think it's I think it's mainly the latter, but I do feel like because it happened upon the impact. It was like I
Oh,
was
right.
hit and my soul just
Yeah.
ejected very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So I think in those moments, I do feel like I was in many ways dead. I'll never know if it was
Yeah.
something that would eventually kill me, probably not. But so I don't really know in that sense.
Yeah.
But I was never sort of pronounced dead in that way.
Right.
So maybe if I hadn't have screamed, would I have come back? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll never know.
Yeah. And I don't know.
It's so interesting.
It sounds to me too like the scream was not necessarily what brought you back, but you were going to come back because that was your soul's,
Yes,
you weren't meant to
of
die.
course. No,
And the scream was
no,
just a memory of, that's when you became aware, that's sort of when you
yeah.
became aware. And it might have even been symbolic in some way.
I
So
think so.
yeah,
I do feel like that. I mean, it feels very much like it was part of my destiny to have this experience so that I can then use it in my life. I know I've always, since that day, I've always known that I was never meant to be dead or die or to leave this plane yet.
yeah,
I was meant to have it to reset me, to reset my being, because the NDE I feel like did reset my entire being.
yeah,
I don't feel like an experience like that would have been given to me at this point in my life for me to then just leave and that would be it.
right. And yeah, and I think I know, and I've always had that
Yeah.
feeling too. So I know what you mean. There's just a knowing. Like I've always known I'm not,
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to die young, not because it's optimism. I just have this feeling that there's more to do. And if I'm wrong,
Yeah.
everyone might watch this and go, oh, that's so sad. But
No, no,
she
no,
thought she was
no,
going to
no.
live forever. But it isn't sad though to me. But so now
Yeah.
you're back in
Yeah.
life, you're healing slowly, painfully.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, talk about whatever you want to about that sort of journey to reacclimating.
Yeah. I mean, spiritually, it was very difficult as well for a while in the initial aftermath, like I was saying, because I wanted to be back there. I really wanted to be back in that space. It was the only space that felt real. This didn't feel real in comparison to that space, and that love that I felt, I just wanted it. I just wanted to be in that space more and more and more. And it took me a while to then realize once I'd come back into my body that there is still a part of me that is in that space, but the part of me that's in that space now is a part that I feel like I can channel and use going forward for the rest of my life. But that's a process that doesn't happen overnight. That comes with obviously a lot of processing and meditating and time and just allowing myself to be as authentic about the experience as I possibly can. And I feel really fortunate having work in the arts and also having been part of an organization called Alternatives in London. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with
Mm-mm.
that, which is an organization in Piccadilly that has various talks and workshops by all the people that we know, weekly and monthly and things. And I was part
Great.
of that team for about sort of 4 or 5 years and made some wonderful spiritual friends there. So kind of coupling the fact that I had spiritual friends that were already open to people like Anita Mojani. She came and gave us, talk as well. So I was familiar with her story as well as working in the arts, and that's all about being authentic. I felt like I could be public about my experience very, very early on,
That's
and
great.
that really helped me to begin to integrate it and acclimatize and assimilate and process, the, as much as I possibly could, so that I could start to then use it in a way that felt authentic and serving,
Hmm.
to the world, if that makes sense. But interestingly, before before that happened, I sort of yo-yoed back into old patterns for a while. So I pushed myself back into work in an attempt to normalize because I was so disorientated and discombobulated from experience with a disability as well now with my leg. So I thought the only thing to do would be to sort of pummel myself back into work as quickly as possible, to try and normalize. But of course, by normalizing, I was actually minimizing.
Mm.
Little did I know at the time. So I did various projects, and the last one I did was actually a show in a regional theatre, and it was a show around domestic violence. And I am so used to playing those kind of authentic sort of heavy roles that I thought nothing of it. But I got to the rehearsal space. I was looking at the material and the script, and I just thought, I'm not ready. This is I can't do this. And plus I being back on stage with this disability, I didn't know how to be. And they had to sort of repurpose the whole show around the fact that I could no longer, walk and do the things on stage that I used to do. I was sitting down, and it was too much too soon
Yeah.
then, and I just literally broke. And at that point, I stopped everything, and it was the break that I actually needed, from sort of before the accident. And I just said, I'm just going to absolutely stop everything and rest and take stock. And that's where that processing that I was just talking about started to take place.
Yep. And I sometimes think that's part of it. In fact, on a lighter note, one of my best friends just fractured her ankle 2 days ago. She
Oh,
tripped. She said to me, I was walking and I don't know what happened. I just all of a sudden, my ankle bent and it snapped and it was so excruciatingly
oh
painful.
God.
And there was no reason for it. And I said, there's always a reason for it. I said, so, and she said, and she's like, and she said, now I can't drive for 6 or 7 weeks and now I have to be in bed. And I said, well, weren't you just telling me that all you do is work and that you feel like your
Hmm,
life is just work, work, work all the time? And I said, guess what? God heard you. And she was
hmm,
like, oh yeah. Cause she's someone that's has ADD and she's always working and always on the
hmm.
go. And we're both voice actors and she's never slows down. And I said, there is value in slowing down and we don't like it
Yeah,
because then we have to sit with our own anxieties and we have to really
yeah,
listen to the silence and be
yeah,
comfortable in the stillness
yeah.
and explore and listen to spirit. And I think that's why sometimes we are slowed down. And in your case it was like, hey, this is you've got you've got to sit and process.
Exactly. Yeah, and I kind of knew it. I knew what when I was doing it, I knew that it was wrong. And whilst I was doing the work, I knew that I'm just going to have to stop and allow myself to break. And the breakage didn't feel like horrible and bad. I mean, it was obviously horrible, but it just felt inevitable.
Mhm.
I knew that after such a massive trauma and NDE and a spiritual experience and PTSD, I knew that I would need to give myself a lot of time
Yeah.
to process, but more than process, to actually move into it.
Mm.
Not just sort of put a plaster on it or sort of whatever, process the experience in a kind of physical, emotional way, but move into it spiritually so I could expand into the space that it was asking me to move into.
Yeah. And what space was it asking you to move into?
Well, it was asking me to move into a space that was more expanded, more authentic. I began to feel and tap into the space that the NDE space. And that's when I began to feel a sense of self-love that was so, it wasn't based, as you say, on anybody else's validations or sort of comments to me. It was just there because I could feel a connection to my heart that was so strong, and my presence was here as opposed to here, which was before the accident. So just getting in touch with that space meant that I was thinking differently. I was thinking from my heart as opposed to thinking from my head. And that meant that I was able to really intuit where I wanted to go in my life and how I wanted to speak publicly and make work from the experience, which of course I hadn't given myself the chance to do for the sort of first sort of year or so after the accident. So it was all beginning to take shape, and I was very slowly moving into a new space and a new life and making a new life for myself that I now feel incredibly proud of and very happy, privileged to be able to have been able to create with the support around me. But had I not given myself that space, and I think it's interesting because I kind of feel like the aftermath and beyond of any kind of post-trauma journey is where the growth and the learning is. And a lot of people I know that I was tempted to in the beginning, sort of take antidepressants and all sorts of things. I didn't take any, but I was tempted to when it was awful, and I remember thinking, this is why they're sort of dished out so sort of willingly, because the pain is so intense that they
Mhm.
just want to stick a plaster over it to feel a bit better in the moment without realizing, and how could people realize, I get it, that actually that's where the growth is. The pain is where the growth and the purpose is. And unless you really go into the eye of that storm, you don't feel the peace that is inevitably there, because and I was so scared of the periphery, which was the storm. But actually, there was a part of me that knew that if I traveled inside that chaos, there'd be something that didn't move. And
That
that
is,
something was that beautiful space.
yeah, that's so beautifully said. I think that's so true that as human beings, we approach life as if this is our only reality. And right now, I don't want to live this reality feeling bad. I want to feel good. Now,
Mm,
obviously, I know you would agree, I'm sure that, there obviously that excludes clinical mental illness and things like that. But when you're
course,
going through something difficult,
course.
that's part of our journey. That's why, in my belief, and I assume yours too, that our souls come here in the first place. Is if it were easy, why would we come here just to surf? I mean, just, we could do that, and we could do that on the other side. We could do anything we want on the other side. It's bliss. We come here to do the hard stuff. And there's surfing, and it's a mix of everything. But we come here because otherwise we're not going to evolve if we don't continue to learn and grow. And the only way we learn and grow is through experiencing adversity and pain. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
or fortunately, if you're on the other side and can look back and go, that was great for my soul. But when you're here,
Mm.
it's really brutal. And so, but I love the way that you worded that. It's just gorgeous.
Oh, bless
Yeah.
you. Thank you. Yeah, no, of course, people with, extreme mental illness and clinical illnesses, of course, I was excluding that from what I was talking about, of course. But thank you for that. Yeah, because I think it's really easy, isn't it, to want to find a quick fix and to want
Yes.
to the instinct for a human being is to get out of pain, whether it's physical or emotional or spiritual, is to just literally to go from one extreme to the other.
Mhm.
And that's where sort of people take drugs and all sorts of things to change their state. And I totally get that. I totally get that. For me, of course, I wanted to too, but I also realized that that would be where the gold is. And I think that's part of the fact that, being an artist, I'm used to digging deep, even though I was disconnected before, I still wanted to dig deep and dig deep where I could. And I knew that I wanted to sort of travel on an internal journey for, sort of the next and however long, a year after the accident, to allow myself to find those pearls that I knew I wouldn't actually find if I didn't stop and take stock and rest and give myself that physical space just to be.
Yeah. And then, yeah, that makes so much sense. Going forward, I mean, of course, I could just sit here with the minutia all day long.
Yeah,
But I mean,
I love it.
I have such a curious mind, and my ex-boyfriend was always making fun of me because he's like, you have so many questions. You're always wanting to know how, why, what. But
Yeah,
so I
but it's
could.
so interesting. You
It's
ask such interesting, detailed, nuanced questions, Shannon. It's wonderful
Oh,
speaking with you.
thank you, thank you. Um, and so, what did you kind of come to, or how is it that you now incorporate that spiritual side and what you've learned from having left your body into what you do now, or how you've sort of moved forward in your life? And it doesn't even have to be in a professional sense, but what is it that you sort of strive to do? What is it that you do? Anything along those lines? I'd love to know.
Yeah, so after the accident, I spoke to a few friends who were also artists, and a couple of them had also had sort of life-changing experiences too. And one in particular was speaking with me, and their experience was around the same time as mine. And so we sort of would call ourselves sort of, fellow traveler, um, and and they would say to me, what are you going to do with this? Because you could write a show, a podcast, an album. The possibilities are endless in terms of what you've done before in your life. And I'd say, yeah, I know, but I'm not ready. I'm not ready. And he would listen to me for days on end, just kind of saying the same. I'm not ready. I'm not ready. His patience was amazing. and, and at one point he said, well, what if you gave yourself just sort of 5 minutes at your computer, no pressure, just 5 minutes at your laptop, and all you wrote was your name, and that's it. Just write your name, maybe even the date, like sort of 4 words max. And I then, my mind just kind of went berserk, and I said, what if I do write more, and what if I don't know what form it's going to take? And he said, really stop, just just allow it to tell you what form it wants to take. And I went, oh, that's an interesting idea. So I sat at my laptop and I started to just to write. And of course, having that lack of pressure meant that I was able to write, because actually, all of my friends and colleagues in the industry were expecting me to make work from this, and I wanted to. It wasn't an expectation that was coming from them. It's because I'd said to them, I'm going to use this in my work. So I was putting this expectation onto myself. And so having that pressure removed was bliss, because I started writing, and a week later I spoke to my friends again, and they said, "So where are you at? Did you write your name?" And I said, "Yes." "Did you write the date?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, and I said, "Well, I have I have the beginning of a podcast, and it's called the Burgundy Book, and it's going to be a storytelling series around the accident and my experience since then, and it's going to be weaved with music and my singing." And they said, "Well, how did you get from, all of that sort of mental noise to this point?" And I said, "Well, because you told me to let it tell me what it wanted to become, and you took away that pressure. So I was able to just access the space that I knew was always there, but you allowed it to come through me." And he was, just like, "That's magic." And I said, "Yeah, I know. Well, you allowed God to come through me, and I'm really grateful." So that's partly what I do now, is I make work and podcasts and storytelling series and like talks around the experience and how it's shaped me, sort of, on the stage and in radio shows and on the BBC and stuff like that. So that's what I do, and I'm so grateful for it, because it really feels like there's a real hunger for authentic work and for people's real experiences. And the world has experienced what it's experienced over the past
Yeah.
year and a half, that people are now sort of really hungering for stories of finding new normal, and how to assimilate a life-changing experience and find a way forward that is nourishing to both the individual and to the world. So I feel really grateful that I'm able to do that. And actually, I've often thought that my accident was preparing me for this moment in time. And I remember thinking last year, when the pandemic was at its highest, I remember thinking, this is so interesting. I really feel like that both the suffering, the pain, and the integration has prepared me to now give. Because had it happened 3 years later, I'd still be in that process.
Right. Yeah. And I love also that, well, I love first of all that you learned that by letting go and trusting, the words would come,
Yeah.
and stop trying to figure out what it is, manipulate it, control it, just let it be what it is.
Mm,
And that's a really good lesson. And then
mm,
also just mentioning the last year and a half, which has been so profound for all of us in so many ways, that this is the time. And actually, that's when I started my podcast as well, that I'd been putting off for
mm,
years and years. And I had started off saying, I'm going to do a podcast based on recovery, on
mm,
addiction recovery. And I still actually, now that I understand how to do a podcast now, because it took tweaking and figuring things out, and some of
I
my
can imagine.
episodes, yeah, the sound was
Yes.
kind of off, and things like that. But now that I find, okay, this is actually not difficult to do, I still might do that, but I kept putting it off. It's not going to be good enough. I'm a perfectionist. I want it to be
Mm.
professionally produced. I mean, look, the lighting in here is what it is. It's not professionally produced. I don't care. It doesn't matter. It's the message.
It's
Um,
the content, of
it's the
course.
content.
Yeah, of
And
course.
I was holding myself back with perfectionism. And then
Mm,
finally there was time and space to say, I have a passion for spiritual things.
yeah.
I started studying with Monica the medium and other mediums, and learning about mediumship and learning to do it, and reading every book I could get my hands on, and then creating this podcast, even though my brain told me, oh, everyone's doing that already. There's no space
Mm,
for you. You can't, yours isn't going to be as good as everybody else's. And yet I'd watched people like you, I knew who Trisha Barker was because I had watched her videos.
mm,
Um, and then I sort of got the message that, okay, a lot of people are doing this, but no one's doing
mm.
it the way that you're doing it, because you are your
Exactly.
own unique individual, and our conversations will be different from the ones that you have with Trisha. And
Yeah.
there's always something valuable, and it's not about who's doing it best or it's just
Mm,
about, my audience will find me, Trisha's will find her, yours will find you, and
yes.
hopefully, and a lot of times they'll find all of us. And a lot of times they'll say, oh, I love her because of this, and I love her because of this, and I relate with her because of this. But it was
Yeah.
that stillness and forcing us to sit still that gave me, and I hope many others, the space to become creative and not and get out of that sense of judgment, and know that there's a place for it, because people are hurting right now, and people need hope, and people need connection.
I think it has been such a profound experience, and I think it, the aftermath is going to take a while, I think, to really show itself in the world and will have a ripple effect
Yeah.
in the years to come. And I've heard so many stories of people, and I feel the same way, of people saying that the last year has given them the opportunity to rethink, and the space has really given them a chance to do something they were always wanting to do, but never really had the, whatever it was, the time, the inclination, the confidence, or the intuition to actually do it. And so many people, I think, have kind of done things that have benefited the world in some way because of this shared experience that we've all had. And I think it's brought the world so much closer, over the past year. And I, for one, feel so grateful for that, because I'm speaking Irons this year, and of course it's all virtual.
Yeah.
So it just means that people like me who are not based in the States can actually be part of an organization, an event like this, without having to go and fly there. I think it's interesting because, obviously in the beginning and certainly through last year, countries closed their borders. But to me, what that also did was, in closing the borders across countries, I feel like we opened the borders to our hearts.
I want to leave it. I really want to leave it there because, see, that's your book. That's the end of your, I mean, that's beautiful. And as I said, I could talk to you for hours, but I know that we actually will. I'm sure that we will continue this conversation on our own, but just in the interest of brevity for the platforms, and so people don't have to tune out. I just want to kind of wrap up by, let us know what it is that you're doing now. Where can people find you? Mention your podcast again, and I will put links below, but just let me know what you'd like to share with everyone.
Oh, thank you. Well, just firstly to say, Shannon, thank you for having me on. And, you and I are connecting as a result of, all this and what's happened over the past year. And so, yeah, thank you for that. So I'm currently creating a podcast called The Burgundy Book, which has had a bit of a hiatus because of my move, but it'll be out on all podcast platforms early next year. And you can find the teasers and various clips from the series on the Burgundy Book Facebook page, which is The Burgundy Book. So you can find me there. You can find me on Twitter at Renu Arora 1, and you can find me on Instagram. I forget my address, but I can put it in the show notes later.
Yeah, and I'll put it down below as well.
So, and I'm always doing bits and pieces of BBC Sounds every now and again. So have a look around, and you'll find things that I'm doing, which incorporates the experience into it, whether it's the focal point or whether it's subliminally somewhere. It'll be in the work.
Wonderful. Well, again, Renu, thank you so much for being here. It's such a pleasure to connect with you, and I know that what you've shared will really resonate with a lot of people, and that's why we do what we do. And so it's just wonderful to know you, and thank you again for your time and energy.
Oh, thank you for having me on, Shannon. What a beautiful, joyful, full, rich conversation this has been. I loved it.
I live for it. Thank you.
I know, me too.
Much love.
Much love to you too.
Thanks.
No worries.